First thing you're gonna do is remove both your rear wheels and tires. Once you've done this, you're gonna disconnect your shock from the trailing arm and then your sway bar link from the sway bar. After you've done that, go ahead and remove your radius arms from your trailing arm. Just want to pick up on the trailing arm, pull your bolts out. And we're just going to let our radius arms hang and we're going to stick our hardware back through. That way we don't lose our bushings. We'll start the bolts, let them hang. And just kind of tilt your trailing arm out a little bit. Make sure your shock's up and out of the way. Drop it down. Put your hardware in it. Let it hang as well. And we're going to go ahead and disconnect the brake caliper. Once the hardware is removed, go ahead and remove the brake caliper. Lay it up and out of the way. Then you'll want to remove your cotter pin from your castle nut. And then your castle nut. And we're just going to pick up on our trailing arm. Wiggle our hub off. This will be a little bit easier if you don't have a long travel kit. We're running a long travel kit, so as soon as we take them shocks off, the suspension wants to go all the way down. So let's go ahead and disconnect it. Move the hub and grab our axle. Pull it out of the transmission, just like that. Make sure your caliper's laying like this. You don't want it to be hanging on that brake line too hard. Now repeat all these steps for the passenger side. Then we're going to go through, remove our clamp or loosen our clamp. That way we can pull our vent tube off our clutch cover. Remove all our hardware for the clutch cover. And then we'll go ahead and remove it. Now we're going to remove the bolt from our primary clutch as well as our secondary clutch. And we're going to go ahead and remove the belt just to make it that much easier to get the clutches off. We have our tool right out of our factory toolkit. We'll just want to thread it in here until it spreads the secondary sheaths apart. Just want to get it as wide as it can be. Then we'll just want to roll our belt right off the secondary. Once you have it off the secondary, you can slide it off the primary. You can just let it lay there because we're going to pull the primary off too. Then we're going to remove our belt removal tool from the secondary clutch. Just unthread it all the way. That's going to take all the tension off of our snap ring so we can remove our secondary. Just unthread it all the way out of there. Then we're going to remove this snap ring right here. We'll remove our washers. And we'll just grab our secondary and slide it straight off. And it's very important that you keep the secondary together. Make sure you don't lose any of your washers or your snap ring. So we're going to go sit this aside right now. That way we know exactly how everything is oriented. And we're going to pull our shock back up out of the way. We're going to grab our primary clutch puller, which one of these can be purchased from SuperATV.com. We're going to thread it right into the primary. Thread it in there. We'll grab our socket and our impact. We'll just go ahead and tighten it up. It should just pull right off of the crankshaft. We'll remove our primary clutch. And it's very important that you leave this belt exactly how it was. You don't want to flip it around whenever you reinstall it. That could cause vibration and cause your clutch not to function properly, make the belt slip. Then we're going to go ahead and start removing all 4 of the Allen-headed screws in the prop shaft. So once you've removed all 4 Allen-headed screws out of the prop shaft, You just want to separate the flange. Just want to grab it. Should be able to wiggle it and get it to slide forward just a little bit here. And once you've slid it off the flange, you're good to go. It'll just sit just like that, and then whenever we go to pull the transmission, we'll just wiggle it right past it. So now we're going to remove these 6 screws. We have 3 Torx and then 3 10mm. We'll go ahead and remove those now. So now we're going to remove the bolts securing the clutch cover to the transmission as well as the motor. There's going to be 4 bolts. 2 of the bolts are going to go through the motor mount in between the motor and transmission. Then the other 2 are going to be bolted to the transmission. Now you can do this by yourself. It is a little bit easier if you have somebody to help you. If you are doing it by yourself, you're going to have, you know, a pretty big wingspan to reach around over here. And you'll put a wrench on your bolt. Then you're going to reach around to the other side with the socket and then just remove the nut off the bolt. You don't want to remove any of these bolts just yet. Now that we have all our nuts removed off of all our bolts, we want to take a pry bar and stick it up underneath the engine, pick up on it a little bit, and then we're going to come over here to the opposite side. And as we're picking up, we're going to remove our bolts. Just want to wiggle it around until you get all your bolts out. And just be mindful that as soon as you pull the last bolt out, this inner clutch cover is going to want to come off as well. So we're just going to leave our pry bar up underneath the transmission for just a minute here. And we're just going to grab this inner clutch cover, slide it off. You'll just want to move anything that's in the way, out of the way. And we'll take our inner clutch cover and we'll set it aside. So we're going to go ahead and disconnect all the wires. We're going to disconnect this connection right here. There'll be a connection back up underneath here on the back side. Disconnect that one. And then we'll come in here and cut any zip ties. The transmission's been out before. It probably has zip ties on it. This one has been, so it's got zip ties holding on to the transmission. If you have push pins, you'll just want to pry those out with a push pin removal tool. So then we'll just pull our wiring back and just keep it out of the way. And then we're going to come right here on our shift linkage. Remove this pin. You may have to get a pair of needle nose pliers or a flathead, something to stick in there, pry it off. And then when you remove this pin, there's going to be a few different shims. You want to make sure that you catch all those. See right here, we got our shims. And then there's going to be this piece on the inside. So after you remove this, you want to make sure you have all of these. You don't want to lose them. I like to go ahead and just remove it all and set it all aside. That way, whenever we're pulling the transmission out, we don't drop anything. So once we've removed the shift cable off of the transmission, you'll just want to back this nut off, just one turn. Only this nut right here, the one that's closest to the engine. And once you've done that, you can just grab your cable and slide it right out. And then just set it off to the side, and you want to make sure that you don't touch that nut. You want to leave it so that way whenever you reinstall your transmission, you don't have to make any adjustments at all. Next, we're going to disconnect the vent tube from the transmission and then lay it up out of the way towards the motor. Then we're going to remove the 7 bolts, the 4 on the transmission side, and the 3 nuts on the frame side of the rear transmission mount, and then separate the mount from the bracket. So once you've removed all your hardware from your rear mount, the mount will just slide right out, and then we're going to go ahead and remove the transmission. We're just going to rotate it as we're picking up. We'll just slide it right out. So now you're gonna wanna go through, clean the transmission, you know, take an air blower, blow it off, brake clean it. Just make sure you don't get any brake clean inside of any of your connections on the transmission, and be careful as you're moving it around. We've already done this, so we're gonna go ahead and remove the shift lever off of the transmission right here. Once you remove the nut, you just wiggle it around. You just gotta keep working it and it'll come right off of there. Once we've removed our selector, then we're gonna remove the clip off of this right here. We've already done it, so we're just gonna pull it straight up. We'll set that aside, and we'll go through and remove all 5 of these bolts. Then what you're gonna have to do is take a small screwdriver and get up underneath the lip right here. Now you have to take a bigger one. You start prying straight up. It does have a bunch of silicone on it, so it will kind of be stuck there on you a little bit. And you'll just remove this, slide it straight up. Make sure all your components stay together, and we'll set this aside. And we'll come in here, we'll remove this, as well as this here, and then this spring. You need to be careful whenever you take that off of there, because sometimes this spring will jump right up and out, and it'll fly across the floor and you'll lose it. And grab this gear right here, remove it as well. And all of these gears are splined, so you can't really mess it up. You just need to be careful, you know, make sure you're inspecting everything as you go to make sure it's all correct, nothing's damaged. And now we're gonna remove all of the bolts securing the case halves together. So once all the bolts are removed, there's gonna be 3 spots on this transmission that you can take a pry bar, a screwdriver, anything like that, stick it in between the 2 case halves, pry up, and just work it around all the way. There'll be one here, one right here, and then one right here. So all I did was took a pry bar, put it in there, worked it here, came over here, worked it a little bit, worked it again, and then it split. So our case is split now, so all we're gonna do is just grab it, and pick straight up. We're just gonna sit this side of the case down, just like that. And now our transmission is fully exposed. We got it all opened up here. So now we're just gonna go through and start inspecting everything, you know, to see if there's anything damaged, anything broke, anything, you know, if you need to order a bearing or any parts before you get started. So we're gonna do that, and we'll be right back with you. Now we're gonna remove the shift drum from the transmission. You wanna grab a hold of the selector shaft here, pick straight up on it, and just kind of wiggle them apart. Should just come apart just like that. We're just gonna find a nice clean rag to sit everything. Just remove this as well. We're gonna grab a hold of our output shaft here. Pull it right out, just make sure you're careful on the seal. We'll grab our idler gear, wiggle it right out. Now we're gonna grab what's gonna be our new low gear, as well as this gear right here. And just wiggle them at the same time. They'll both have to come out together, just like that. So we'll sit this one just like that. And we're gonna take this one and sit it just like this. So here's our new low gear shaft. This is gonna be our gear reduction here. What we wanna make sure of, there's 2 different surfaces. There's one for the large bearing, one for the small bearing. What we have facing up right now is gonna be our short bearing, our small bearing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our bearing puller, and we're gonna do one side at a time. So everything that we take off of this side, we're gonna instantly transfer it right over to this shaft. That way nothing gets misplaced, out of order, because there is gonna be quite a few gears that we're changing as well as bearings. So we're just gonna slide our bearing puller on here. Doesn't have to be super tight, it literally just needs to go around the bottom of the bearing there. We're gonna grab the rest of our bearing removal tool. And you can pick one of these up at your local hardware store. You can purchase them online. They're a pretty common part to buy. A lot of places will let you rent them, which is usually the better option. So you just slide this on there. We're just going to spin this shaft down until it hits the center of the shaft. We're just going to thread this in hand tight, just make sure everything's centered. Nothing has to be super tight or anything like that. We're just going to make sure this is all the way up on the bottom of the bearing, and we're just going to go ahead and tighten this up. Make sure whenever you do this, you have a good hold on the shaft as well as the lower portion of the bearing removal tool. The bearing will just come right off of there just like that. And you'll just want to loosen your tool up. Pull your bearing out. We'll set it just like that. And we're going to grab this hub, slide it straight off, exactly how it was. And we're going to remove this snap ring. Pull it off. And grab our gear. There'll be a washer right here. We'll sit that straight down. We'll just lay our gear down just like that, exactly how we took it off. And we're going to grab a hold of our spider here, sit it down just like that. And this side's completely disassembled at this point. So what we're going to do is, we're going to grab our shaft, and we're just going to reassemble it just as it came apart. So we're going to take our spider, slide it down on there. We're going to take our gear. We're going to take our washer or our shim, put it on there, then our snap ring. I'm just going to make sure that our snap ring's fully seated. So once we have our snap ring fully seated, we're going to grab our hub and make sure the side that has the squared out notches are facing down towards the gear, just like this. Then we're going to go ahead and flip the shafts over and start removing all the gears off of this side. So now we're going to go ahead and remove our bearing from the opposite side of our shaft here. We want to get it set up the same way as we did the opposite side. So once you've removed the bearing, you're going to go ahead and remove this snap ring right here. We're just going to set everything in order as we remove it. We're going to remove this gear. So we'll set it just like that. Make sure we know which way the snap rings are going. And we're going to grab this bearing right here. You just want to be extra careful with this bearing. And a lot of times, a washer will stick to the bottom of the bearing. So we'll set that right there. Then we're going to remove this snap ring. We'll set it right there. We're going to remove this hub. Set it just like that. Then we're going to remove this gear. First we need to remove this snap ring as well. So remove that snap ring. Then will be a shim. Set that right there. Then we'll pull our gear up. Set it just like that. There's going to be another set of bearings here. We'll set it just like this. And now this shaft, which is our factory shaft, is completely disassembled. We're going to go ahead and reassemble the shaft right here. First we're going to take our bearing, slide it down. We'll take this gear, We'll slide it on just like this. We'll take our washer and our snap ring. And we'll take our hub, we'll slide it down on there. So then it goes washer. And snap ring. Then we'll take our smaller of the two needle bearings and install it on our gear, just like this. And the last shim, as well as the snap ring. Then go through, make sure everything spins nicely. Make sure the notches on your gear match up with the notches on your hub. Same for the top one. They should go together just like this. Now we're going to remove this bearing. Once you remove this bearing off of the shaft right here, we're going to go ahead and remove the snap ring. Then you'll want to remove this gear right here. Whenever you remove it, you want to install this gear with the beveled side going towards this gear right here, so it'll slide on just like that. And then you'll reinstall your shim and your snap ring, and then we're going to head over to the press and press on our bearings. The biggest thing is just to make sure that you have your bearings started on there nice and straight. We've already got our bearings started on there straight, and it's perfectly fine to press off of this bottom bearing. So we just have it laying on a good flat surface. You're gonna make sure you get something that fits on the inner race of the bearing. Just like anytime you're pressing a bearing on. We're just gonna go ahead and get it lined up and go ahead and press this bearing all the way on. So you're gonna make sure that it goes all the way down and that it fully seats on the shaft. You're gonna make sure that the inner race on the bottom portion of the bearing is sitting on the shaft there. Ours is. Now we're gonna press our bearings onto our other shaft. Now that we have our bearings installed and they're spinning good and free, it's time to go ahead and get everything reinstalled into our case. Just gonna grab them just like this and simultaneously slide them in together. Make sure they both fully seat. Make sure you're not making any contact where you shouldn't be. Just like that. Looks like it's good to go there. And we're gonna go ahead, take this shaft, we'll slide it back through the seal and back into place. So whenever you're doing this, make sure you're being careful. You don't want to mess your seal up. Make sure the gears go together good, just like that. And we're going to grab our idler gear. Wiggle it back down into place. And we're going to grab our gear selector here. Slide it back into place. You just want to make sure that it goes onto both of the hubs. You may have to pick up on them a little bit to get it started. And grab a hold of this shaft and pick up on it. You don't want it to go down in the groove just yet, but you want to make sure that each of these notches are facing towards you if you're standing looking at the transmission like this. And we're going to take our shift drum. Just kind of loop it in. You have to push down on your gears a little bit and just kind of work it back into place. And then just make sure everything's fully seated. Make sure all the teeth are in there. Make sure it's fully seated on your hubs. Just like that. Just give it a couple shakes. Go through and just double check everything before you put this transmission back together, that everything's in there correctly. You don't want to have any issues. Now's the time to check everything out. Look everything over. Make sure it's exactly how it's supposed to be. Next, we're going to go through and make sure that our case is completely clean, where it's going to match up with the other half. We've already done this, so what we're going to do is take some gray silicone. You want to make sure that you use gray because it has the highest oil resistance. So then we're just going to take our silicone, apply a small bead all the way around. Now we're going to take our case half and make sure it's all clean. Ours is. Then we're just going to slide it together. We're going to go through, make sure we have a good bead of silicone all the way around. Once we tighten the bolts, more silicone will push out to make an even better seal. Looks like we're all sealed up. You'll want to go through, make sure your shift drum is coming up through right here. There'll be an O-ring seal on that. You want to make sure it's not pinched and it's properly seated. Then we're going to go ahead and get all our bolts that couple our case halves together, get them all started, and then go through and fully tighten them. Now we're going to go ahead and reinstall all our components that are going to attach to the shift drum. The first piece we're going to grab is going to be the small gear with the 1 dot on that gear right there. And all these are master keyed. And we're going to line the larger spline up with the larger spline on the gear, just like this right here. Then we're going to take this gear right here and we're going to line these 2 dots up with the 1 dot on this gear. So it should look just like this. And as long as you have the flat on the shift drum facing towards the Polaris, everything should line up properly. However, you do want to double check, just to make sure that your dots are lined up. And we're going to take this piece right here where our shifter is going to attach. We're going to line it up with the splined portion, just like that. We're going to line this up on the large spline, just like we did. So it should look just like this. Should have the piece where your shifter is going to attach, just like that, whenever it's all assembled. And the next thing we're going to do is grab our spring. We're going to take our spring and loop it onto this notch right here on this arm. And whenever you're doing this, be careful. You want to push the spring down onto the case just like that in that groove. So at this point, yours should look just like this. Once we've done that, we're going to make sure that this portion is clean, which is going to be what seals the case up here on the top. And then this around here is all clean. And we're going to grab our silicone. We're just going to put a small bead, an even lesser bead than we put around the actual case. smear it around there. Just to make sure it coats it. Like I said, you don't want a big bead. And you can just kind of go through and smooth this out up here. You can use a glove or you can just use your finger. Either way, you just don't want a bunch to get down in here. So if there's any on this lip, just kind of take your finger and just wipe it off. Make sure your hands are clean every time after you do it. That way you're not smearing it all right back down in there. Go through, make sure we don't have any on this spring, anything like that. So we got a good clean edge there. Hands wiped off. Then we're going to go ahead and line everything back up. Should just go just like this. It'll all slip right into place. May have to wiggle it around just a little bit. Sometimes it likes to get stuck right here. Just go down, push it all down. Make sure you got a good little bit of silicone smashing out of there. Like I said, you don't want a ton. And we're going to take all of our hardware. It secures this cap on. We're just going to take a little bit of silicone again. You know, nothing too crazy. Just a little dot right there. Just make sure your holes are lined up good and straight. Then just start all the hardware before you tighten it. And after we get them all silicone down, we'll let this sit for a minute, just like we did on the case half. And then we'll go ahead and we'll torque them to factory spec. Now we're going to install our shift lever. We're going to make sure that we line up the big spline on the lever with the big spline right here. Make sure that you have it oriented properly. A lot of times you can tell, you know, because where you had to kind of pry on it to get it off of there, you'll see where you kind of marred it up a little bit. So we'll just slide it down on there as far as we can get it. And then a lot of times I like to just take a socket that's a little bit bigger, give it a couple taps. That way we know it's all the way down. We'll take our nut, thread it back on there. We'll go ahead and tighten that. Then we're going to take our sensor, and it only goes on one way. There's no way to put it on wrong. So we're just going to put it on just like this right here. And then we'll go ahead and put our wave spring on, and then our clip. And then it's time to get our transmission reinstalled into our machine. Now it's time to reinstall our transmission. So we're just going to grab it. And just slide it down into place, just as we removed it. Make sure that all your wiring and everything's out of the way. Then you'll just want to get it slid somewhat to where it's going to be. Obviously, we're going to have to move it around. So right there's about how you want to start. You just want to get it put in there and push it towards the passenger side of the machine. And then we're going to grab our mount, and we'll just go ahead and remove all the hardware from it. Go ahead and take our nuts off of each of these studs. We'll go ahead and attach this to the rear portion of the frame where we removed it from. Let's go ahead and get all of our nuts started. So next we're going to grab one piece of our mount and slide the bolts through the transmission. So we're going to line these two holes up with these two holes on the transmission. We're just going to slide our plate in. And once our plate's in there, we're gonna take our bolts. Just pop them through the holes there. All right, so those 2 bolts are through. Now we're gonna go over to the opposite side, and we're gonna take our threaded plate, and we're gonna get it lined up, and we're gonna start our bolts that we previously just pushed to the transmission here. So a lot of times you can just kind of put the threaded plate on the threads of your bolt, then reach around to the opposite side, or have somebody help you. So like I said, we're just gonna start them. You don't wanna tighten anything just yet until we get our transmission completely mounted up. Now you're gonna notice that your transmission is quite a bit lower than the mount. So what you can do is take a pry bar on the back side of this transmission, and the bolt that we're gonna wanna get in first is gonna be the larger M10 bolt that's gonna go through the actual mount that we just attached to the frame. We're gonna take our pry bar, pick up our transmission, and as you're picking up, you may have to wiggle it back. Just gotta do whatever you gotta do to get it lined up so that bolt will go in. And you may have to come over here to the opposite side. Just kind of pick it up a little bit over here as well. And as you're picking up, push that bolt through or have somebody help you. In this instance, we got our camera guy, Kemper, helping us out. And then we'll go ahead and get our nut started. So once we have that one attached, we're gonna grab this bolt right here that has your washer on it, and we're gonna get it started through the bushing and through the bracket. So same thing, you just wanna put your pry bar in there, pick up on this transmission, just wanna keep moving this transmission around until you can get that bolt hole lined up, and then you'll just pop the bolt through. Next, we're gonna grab one of our long bolts that attaches the transmission to the motor. Normally it'd be facing this side, so it'd be coming from the driver's side to the passenger side. We're gonna flip it around and push it through the passenger side to the driver's side to help us hold the transmission to the motor. That way it makes it easier to get our prop shaft on, our inner clutch cover, everything. So we're just gonna put a pry bar underneath the transmission here. We're just gonna kind of wiggle it around until we get it lined up with this mount. Just got our bolt started in there. That's just gonna hold our transmission in place for us. And we're gonna come back over here to the opposite side. We're gonna go ahead and grab our prop shaft hardware. We'll go ahead and get our prop shaft reinstalled to the transmission. So make sure you get all your hardware started before you tighten anything. So now that we have our motor and transmission coupled together with the one bolt, you know, kind of holding everything in place, we're gonna go ahead and take our inner clutch cover, slide it back into position. Whenever you go to put this on, you wanna make sure you're not pinching any wires. No wires back in behind the inner clutch cover. And then as you can see, we're still a little bit off of alignment here. So in this case, what you're gonna have to do is kind of wrestle the transmission back a little bit. So we're just gonna get it to a point to where it'll kind of stay. Then we're gonna take our pry bar, just kind of pry up on the transmission, just kind of wiggle it around until we can see our holes. You can see daylight through a couple of these holes here. The ones that are going to take these smaller of the two bolts on the secondary side of the clutch cover. Just going to go ahead and slide them all the way through. Got those two bolts through there. All right. Now we're going to take our other long bolt. Feed it through. And it may not go all the way through, but as long as it goes through the transmission, we'll have to line it up on the opposite side. Then we're gonna come over here to our motor. We're gonna see what we gotta do to line up some of these holes. I got a hole lined up right here, and it's gonna be for the Torx headed bolt. So we're just gonna kind of wiggle everything with the pry bar until we get it lined up. You know, we don't wanna force anything. You know, again, you want to make sure that there's no wires caught in between the clutch cover and the engine or the transmission. You know, something's going together real hard or a bolt's not wanting to thread in easy, you know, you just need to stop. The one thing about the turbo is if you cross thread a bolt, it's directly into the motor, so it's going to be a pretty big ordeal. It's not something you're going to want to deal with, especially this close to being done. Then just continue to line up all the holes and get all the bolts installed, but do not fully tighten anything just yet. So at this point, we have all the hardware on the primary side of the inner clutch cover tightened. So all 6 bolts over here tight. None of these bolts over here are tight. They're all just started. We have all the nuts started on the back sides. We're going to want to tighten the 2 larger bolts. So this one as well as this one. So what we're going to do, the lower one's the easier one to get to. This one's kind of tricky to get to. So what I like to do is take my wrench. We'll put our wrench on this side. And we're going to grab our socket for the opposite side. Get it lined up and then tighten it. Then we'll go ahead and tighten this bolt right here as well. Just have to pull your hoses up out of the way. Pull them to the side. Get your socket on there, then come over here with your wrench. Hold it in place. Get it tight. Then we're going to come back here to our motor mount where our 3 studs are sticking through. We're going to go ahead and tighten all these up. Once these 3 studs right here are tight, then go through, fully tighten all the hardware, and reinstall your wiring. Now you're going to want to go through, double check all your hardware, make sure everything's fully tightened, make sure nothing's making any contact anywhere that it shouldn't be. Then you're going to want to make sure your fill plug's tightened, fill the transmission up, reinstall your clutches, put your belt on, reinstall your suspension. And that's how easy it is to install SuperATV's gear reduction on this Polaris RZR Turbo. For more information on this gear reduction or any of SuperATV's great products, feel free to give us a call at 855-743-3427 or check us out online at superatv.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.